You're all very welcome to this event. I want to thank the Heinrich Böll Association for inviting the Achill Writers Group to be part of the weekend. It's very, very privileged to be here. The Achill Writers want to dedicate this event to the memory of a fellow writer, a friend, and a beautiful human being, Ann Shannon. So we will have just a little moment of reflection.
Thoughts on Irish rain. The rain here is absolute, magnificent and frightening. To call this rain bad weather is as inappropriate as to call scorching sunshine fine weather. You can call this rain bad weather, but it is not. It is simply weather, and weather means rough weather. It reminds us forcibly that its element is water, falling water, and water is hard. During the war, I once watched a burning aircraft going down on the Atlantic coast. The pilot landed it on the beach and fled from the exploding machine. Later, I asked him why he hadn't landed the burning plane on the water, and he replied, "Because water is harder than sand." When the electric light goes out, when the first tongue of a puddle licks its way under the door, silent and smooth, gleaming in the firelight, when the toys which the children have left lying around, when corks and bits of wood suddenly start floating and are borne forward by that tongue, when the children come downstairs scared and huddle in front of the fire, more surprised than scared, for they also sense the joy in this meeting of wind and rain, and that this howling is a howl of delight, then we know we would not have been as worthy of the ark as Noah was. Inlanders' madness to open the door to see what's up outside. Everything's up. The roof tiles, the roof gutters, even the house walls do not inspire much confidence. It is a good thing always to have candles, the Bible, and a little whiskey in the house, like sailors prepared for a storm. Also a pack of cards, some tobacco, knitting needles and wool for the women. For the storm has a lot of breath, the rain holds a lot of water, and the night is long. Then, when a second tongue of rain advances from the window and joins the first, when the toys float slowly along that narrow tongue towards the window, it is a good thing to look up in the Bible whether the promise from God to send no more floods has really been given. It has been given. We can light the next candle, the next cigarette, shuffle the cards again, pour some more whiskey, abandon ourselves to the drumming of the rain, the howling of the wind, the click of the knitting needles. It was some time before we heard the knocking on the door. At first we had taken it for the banging of a loose bolt, then for the rattle of the storm. Then we realized it was human hands, and the naivete of the continental mentality can be measured from the fact that I expressed the opinion it might be the man from the electric company. Quickly the door was opened, a dripping figure of a man pulled in, the door shut, and there he stood, with his cardboard suitcase sopping wet, water running out of his sleeves, his shoes, from his hat. It almost seemed as if water were running out of his eyes. But he had merely come from the bus stop 50 paces through this rain, had mistaken our house for his hotel, and was by occupation a clerk in a law office in Dublin. "Do you mean to say the bus is running in this weather?" we asked. "Yes," he said, "it is, and only a bit behind schedule, but it was more of a swim than a drive." "Are you sure this isn't a hotel?" "Yes, but..." He, Dermot was his name, turned out when he was dry to know his Bible, to be a good card player, a good storyteller, a good whiskey drinker. Moreover, he showed us how to bring water quickly to the boil on a tripod in the fireplace, how to broil lamb chops on the same ancient tripod, how to toast bread on long forks, the purpose of which we had not yet discovered. And it was not till the small hours that he confessed to knowing a little German. He had been a prisoner of war in Germany, and he told our children something they will never forget, must never forget. how he buried the little gypsy children who had died during the evacuation of the Stutthof concentration camps. They were so small, he showed us, and he had dug graves in the frozen ground to bury them. But why did they have to die? Asked one of the children. Because they were gypsies. But that's no reason. You don't have to die because of that. No, said Dermot, that's no reason. You don't have to die because of that. We stood up. It was light now, and at that moment it became quiet outside. Wind and rain had gone away. The sun came up over the horizon, and a great rainbow arched over the sea. It was so close we thought we could see it in substance. As thin as soap bubbles was the skin of the rainbow. Corks and bits of wood were still bobbing about in the puddle when we went upstairs to the bedrooms.
Gyrmaigod Ann Betu Igoni in our group. Okay. Achill Writers Group were given a theme or themes to write on for this particular event, and it was the environment, climate, or place, or a combination of all three. So, and they have risen to the occasion beautifully. So I think there are 10 of us who will be reading this afternoon, which is wonderful. We, in the Achill Writers Group, we have a group that meets on a Thursday, every second Thursday of the month, and another group that, and sometimes the same people from the group meet on every second Saturday. But you need to know what every second Tuesday and every second Saturday is. This is Achill. Okay, I'll start off, and my piece, I'll read two pieces, one a little bit longer in two parts. It's called Reflection in Deep Time, and the second one is a short poem. Part 1, First Thing. A child, birthed into chaos, the umbilical cord to the new world threatened to strangle her. A mother who'd waited for this child held her close, refused to cut the cord linking their lives, refused to barter her life. Crowned with a call, the child announced her presence with a full-throated cry. She'd crossed the threshold of change. She would be the change. Hearts receptive to beauty opened. They said, "She's been here before." "Watch this one," said another. Sybil, or Sibby to those who knew her, lived her dyings and rebirthings in the only world she knew. A boundaried, rocky place formed by the brutal coming together of tectonic plates from eons past and a melting ice. Her feet moved to the rhythm of the cosmic dance of change on a path through seldom trod life. She felt the crushing differences that would set her world apart, set her apart from the world. Surrounded by water, a place of unconformity, of contradiction. She saw the fault line of deep time, saw the gap in her own knowing, trusted the silence. She struggled through the trail of tears, Balach na Sacraja, stopped to rest at Gielty, lamenting the unmourned dead, heard mothers' cries at Killiney, echoes from Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children. "Woe to you who do not remember," she cried. "The innocent are again being sacrificed on the altars of power by those with transhumanist agenda. The man made impotent, the woman lives with barren womb. Parents have no choice, no voice." Part 2, The In-Between. Walking the storm-strewn shoreline between the tides, she picked her way through the debris of the forsaken. Broken bodies, broken lives. Lost in time, she found him, buried by a petrified oak forest, submerged in the intertidal zone. A bog body resurrected in time, a ligature round his neck, a sacrifice to power. Her tears coursed a trail of unexpressed sadness, of paths not taken, of truths not spoken, of lives not lived. Cradling the dark brown messenger from the dead, she wailed the age-old remembrances carried on prevailing winds, of warnings not heard, of trusts broken, of people exiled in a land that was no longer theirs, no longer a homeland. The ancestors' inheritance sold to the highest bidder for 30 pieces of silver. She cried, "Woe to you, land grabbers, cash rich, spirit poor." A place devoid of people is not a place, she said. People make places. Freedom is a place. My poem is called Cuinu Mocnamara, or The Cry of the Porpoises. And there is an epigraph from Euripides, who was born in 480 BC. And it's from Hippolytus and the Bacchae by Euripides. All man's pollutants doth the salt sea cleanse. She rode the waves with them, revelled in their playfulness. They nudged her to be more daring, opened her to freedom beyond words. They called among themselves a sonic resonance, a keening carried on the waves, a wailing echoed from the deep. She awakened to their cry. Too late, she knew. Went to meet them in the blood moonlight. They'd stranded their dead and dying on the shore, messengers from the future. Her deep sobs rippled on the receding tide. A rage ripped through her body. Knife in hand, cut their bloated bellies open to spill their deadly contents on the strand. Too late, she cried. Too late. Thank you. Okay, I would like to invite Patty Bushell up next. Patty.
Hello. Well, you can hear English is not my native language, and I learned to write at the Achill Writers Group in English. So this short story is a homework for the Achill Writers Group from about a month ago. It was inspired by a small item on the news. A Frenchman had been released from hostage in the state of Niger. I haven't a clue how to pronounce it in English. So I just use the French pronunciation. I hope you don't mind. If I had not been afraid, I would have stayed. François was well aware of the ambivalence he felt before he was hustled into the room where he was going to be debriefed. But he did not utter his misgivings aloud in front of his well-fed, well-dressed and well-scrubbed interrogators. Early in the morning, before the first call to prayer, Hamid had woken him with a handful of dates and a cup of sweet mint tea. François had raised himself to one elbow. "Thanks, Hamid, but why this VIP treatment?" Hamid had turned back towards the tent flap and said, without looking at him, "You'll be leaving in 5 minutes, so hurry." François cried out, "Hey, wait, what's this?" but Hamid had already left. Call the friendship with his guard a serious touch of the Stockholm syndrome. But François was sure that if he had met Hamid under different circumstances, they would also have become friends. Hamid, the proud Tuareg, who, for some reason, had fallen in with a bunch of homeless fugitives collected under the banner of religious fanaticism. Even kijken. François got up and dressed in the tattered jabba. He stuffed the dates into the pockets of his photographer's gilet. It was the only garment that had withstood the wear and tear of 4 years' captivities. Fixing his voluminous headdress, he left the tent that had been his home and prison. Outside, shadows were moving around in the dark. He didn't recognize Hamid among them. What had Hamid meant when he said he was leaving? Fear pushed up from his stomach and almost choked him. Dark-clad man roughly took his arm and pushed him without a word forward. "Where is Hamid?" François protested. From the shadows, the shape of a pickup truck emerged. He was made to board the truck bed where 2 men with AK assault rifles were already seated. As the black shape of the camp receded, the muezzin's call to prayer sounded from the loudspeakers. The beautiful words, harsh and misshapen by the primitive system. The sun came up to the left. So we are going south, François thought. The camp, he knew, was in the region of Bidon 5, an oil drum that used to mark the border between Algeria and Niger since the first Michelin map of Africa, now only a myth. After the fall of Gaddafi, the region had been under control of bands of jobless mercenaries who affiliated themselves with ISIS. They had nowhere to go, nothing to eat or lose. Pushed northward by the UN peacekeeping forces in Mali and pushed southward by the Algerian army and the private armies of the oil and gas companies that exploited the rich fields of Hadra, they terrorized this stretch of Sahara. For a living, they traded in hostages, and local women they had made into slaves. Lately, there had been a welcome easing of tension in the camp when the new military rulers of Mali kicked out the French peacekeeping forces. François, a French citizen, had feared that this would lead to his beheading, but the opposite happened. He was given more freedom, till now. He was on the move and not going east into Libyan warlords' controlled territory, but south towards the river and the state named Niger. As the heat of the sun was getting intenser, the landscape was slowly changing, an indication that they had left the mythical Bidon 5 behind and were in the country of Niger. Traces of human habitation were becoming evident. Dead palm trees, humps of concrete and clay that once had been villages, carcasses of animals and maybe even humans. Decennia-long drought had left more damage than the war of the last 12 years. The damage of that was floating in the Mediterranean. But what would be in store for him? After a 6-hour drive, he was kicked out of the pickup in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing else to do but wait for the night and the stars. François did what he had learned to do in the past 4 years of being a hostage in the Sahara Desert, making himself small and covering himself with the white and long claws of his headdress. He ate some of the dates he had put in the pockets of his gilet and dough staff, the heat building up around him. The drone of several motorized vehicles woke him. It came from the south, the opposite direction from which he had come. The flags they flew were not the black banners of his hostage keepers. He recognized the pale blue of the UN and the orange-white-green of Niger. His immediate reaction was that of joy. He jumped up and started waving frantically. Then he stood still, his hands falling limp beside his body. His 4-year ordeal was over. He did not have to be afraid for his life anymore. But he was dismayed too, because he would never find what he had come to look for in this barren place, his true identity. Not the identity he had when he came to Africa, that of a son of a Frenchman and his Berber wife, but that of a free African, a Nabaseer, like Hamid, but different.
I have written 2 poems. The first one is called Michael Davitt Bridge, Achill Island. We were an island once again for a day, that last time they swung the bridge. Through distress and disruption, this rigid creature sat, held tight from going those crucial inches to meet the road again. It stalled mid-air, nearly there. There was no budging the beast, this man-made whale, almost in its place, but not quite. As waters crashed, I heard it. As wind scraped past, I felt it. The never-ending welcome back, the eternal sad goodbye that echoed in the sound of home below us. My second poem is called Our Garden. It doesn't leave much to the imagination. John Sweeney pulls up in the blue van, his husky a trusted companion. He brings friendship and advice, plants, cuttings, the reassurance that everything we are doing is right, and the promise of a beautiful garden in time. We trust his wisdom, we get to work. I dig with my hands, moving earth between fingers, on both knees, willing on my little world. We plant in late summer in the hope for what might come. Grains of sand and soil stay wedged under fingernails, gritting their reminder of the day's toil, the body's spoil. I yearn to feel each scrape of the soil, to earn it all. Spring comes empty-handed, while daffodils stand tall, then fall. The blood-red leaves of the Norwegian maple send a vibrant nod to the past, where nothing thrived in this barren place. I look around for others, hidden now amongst the growths. Mighty oak, birch, hawthorn, mountain ash, and weeping willow, the ceremony of their dig absorbed now in birdsong. Our garden has shaped itself, twists and turns of rambling branches from self-seeding trees, populating and propagating their world into mine. Thrush and finch call out to the blackbird for more. She sings her approval of the world for us all. 2 small children amble over twigs. They play and imagine their forest game in my carefully cultivated wilderness. I think of John Sweeney and his lovely confidence in nature and nurture and time. I sit on the swing in the centre of the garden and move with the breeze, a moment to relish my pride of place, the years that brought us here, tamed by the wild, shaped by the soil, everything as it was meant to be. Daffodils give way to tulips and bluebells, while buds turn bare branches into a thrive of green that dance on the wind with me. Our daughter comes towards me, careful steps, arms cradling flowers picked for me, just their heads though, palm-sized gifts, easy plucking for her spring offering of yellows, blues and reds. I look to where they had been growing, see their stems still tall in the fertile ground, overrun by another force of nature. Abundance in the garden of my dreams.
I have two short poems as well. The first one is about a whale that washed ashore on Kiel Beach a couple of years ago on Christmas Eve. It's called Whale Song. All day we converged like old friends at a wake to see the whale washed ashore on Christmas Eve. To step out its length, witness the weight and stretch of it. The belly bulged smooth, the slackened mouth. The intimate rigging exposed, bare as the spokes of an umbrella resting disused on strand. The eyelid, which seemed gently closed. Clicks of cameras bit the air. We kept our distance, picturing the ghost of it swimming last summer in our midst. The storm which brought it raged all night. I dreamt that tide and sand conspired to cup and lift it back to sea. Next morning's visitors left bereft. Only sand, cliffs, the towering mountain, and seaward a moan of song. So I'm hopping from one beach to another now. This one is inspired by sea glass found on Kim Beach. Sea glass and amethyst. It's called the Sea Glass Cabinet. The gems are pinned and mounted. Now they call for names. I could risk the sacrilege of beryl or sapphire for these diamonds in the rough, but rather name them for the wave-worn places. Here's Oleron, a shard of cobalt blue warming at the foot of the citadel, our faces brightening with the find. Here's Carrigskeewan, its pale offering, a crystal droplet of April sky, resting with coral and sea lettuce and our plodded prints. And Kim, whose amethyst rubs shoulders with the glass of whalers, their sunken bottles, now marbled trinkets for seals and sand eels. They speck the sea with story of whiskey, poison, sackings and shipwrecks, spilled tinctures, stoppered letters leached of unanswered ink. Lost, they tumble on the tongue of the tide and, in the big lift, toss fizzing secrets into our waiting hands. Thank you.
This is a short poem called Achill. Crahan is soft, textured velvet in shifting sunlight. Sleevemore is mottled with cloud shadow and plaited with purple and green. The mist lifts, and suddenly Minnon is there in majesty, that distinctive outline, so blunt and recognizable. Drumbeats of hail are sudden, loud and swift as the shower sweeps across. Sunshine follows in minutes, and the islands are clear out at sea. The lush coconut smell of gorse is heavy and soporific. A cuckoo calls somewhere near. and the sun hits hard off the lake. The lights by Ducanella reflect in the lake at dusk. The full moon skirts Minnon, and a vixen howls on the hill.
The first time I met Ann Shannon, it was around 2006 at the Heinrich Böll Festival weekend, and we were walking back to our cars. After our walk and talk with Owen Halpin at Ridge Point, I spotted a car and was commenting on the rust, knowing that rust appears on cars with the sea salt. An indignant voice turned on me and said, "How dare you? This is my chariot you're talking about." This was how I introduced myself to Ann Shannon. I shrunk with embarrassment as I tried to wriggle my way out of that insult. Notwithstanding, Anne and I became good friends from that day on. She introduced me to Scollachla workshop with Macdara Woods, where she had been attending from the time she arrived in Achill. I grew to know her through her stories, always told with a nimpish good humour. One particular story stands out. This was the time she came out of a dance hall in Dublin to find O'Connell Street in tatters after the blowing up Nelson's Pillar. Herself and her friends stood around in amazement. They had not even heard the explosion. Her stories will live on in my memory. She later invited me to join Achill Writers Group. When we came to Achill this new year, a card was sitting on our windowsill, drenched, but I eventually could open the envelope, and it was a lovely Christmas card from Anne. My last email to Anne was sent around midnight on the night before our Achill Writers Group. I wasn't expecting a reply, but it soon came, saying she was struggling with her piece of writing for the following day, which had got lost in the system. Her piece, Rules Are Meant to Be Broken, and her confirmation pledge, and how she broke it in Lyon in France, where she lived for 30 years, I think, by accepting a glass of sherry. Gentle, unassuming, encouraging Anne will always be remembered in the Achill community.
Our original sin, this is an introduction to what I have written. Our original sin was calling it global warming. We heard too often the glib, how great it would be to be a bit warmer here. Now we know of it as climate change. But even hearing about what's happening now, here, we don't really feel it, and certainly not enough to change, to care enough to change. We were asked to write on climate, place, environment, to write towards this year Heinrich Böll Weekend's theme, and this is my fevered response. So much writing is nostalgia or exhuming the past, often beautiful, but I wanted to look a little forward. To borrow from W.B. Yeats, a terrible beauty is born, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. There is climate change. We will all have to change to the climate. Animals overheat, water expands, air becomes too light for flight. My piece is in 4 parts, and it is a heated piece. It isn't like a cool Atlantic rainforest. The title is On Heating an Inflamed Situation. Part 1, Fire. Brimstone to the lip, the pyro causes flow up and over, petrifying everyone in their path, not unreasonably frozen in fear. The shadows cast forward from these pulsing lights writhe on the land shapes ahead. 2. Earth. Like sparkles on lids of closed eyes, blind sheep heat-struck tumble down the sheer grey mountainside. Slowly they fall, hitting heather and scree, a zigzag descent, trailed by loyal lambs. Good mothers, chosen for good mothering alone, in disease and distress fall, watched through the haze of heat from the shepherd's van, idling on the road. Unshorn, ragged, heaving an anchor of heavy wool, sheep land stunned, rise, bleat, and gather their young, feelingly nuzzle and mother and eat. The flock lead the shepherd seer, bound in red metal. But accounted enough for one day, wheels accelerate on grey tarmac away. Shepherd, close your eyes, see the mirage, open the windows, let the hot wind beat inside, feel the camber urging sideways, dry drains calling. Graft the car onto your senses, swerve the tires away from the ditch. You know this road. Accelerate. Clench your eyes more tightly still till sparkles dance. Sense the road decline and dip, ascend. Know to turn again strongly against time and turn again. The impact of a sheep, then a lamb, then a sheep, then a lamb overturns you. 3. Water. Enthroned calmly at seashore edge, raise a hand to refuse the incoming tide. You will it. Long period waves lick at your shoes, discarding seaweed, sand and jellyfish, returning plastic, edging footward the wet dry line that claims the beach. The water is warmed, surface tension brimming, looming and threatening feet and ankles. The gravity of moon and sun is too weak to turn the tide at your command, so you add and entangle greater and weaker gravities, planets and asteroids, a net of influence to hold back the water, but it flows through and on and up and round. Wet-wasted, impossible now to walk on water. The peaks and troughs are stumble steps. You flail for balance as the waves crest and break. In surprising amplitudes you splash and stagger. Waves foam like fleece around you. Rise and roil and swarm and swell. The long history arriving from the horizon. On listening, on negotiating, on feeling, intimidating, inundating, inevitable. 4. Air. The pilot looks skywards. Our atmosphere brims towards the moon and stars, expanding, heating, less dense, less uplifting. Stranding planes on grey, hazy concrete, flight feathers plucked. High clouds of evaporated glacier lead the eye, a fever dream of jet stream travel soaring by, memories of being up there, in, among, through, mirages of leisure wasted and misspent. Fleece clouds haunt the pilot's mind. Salt sweat blurs his vision as he throttles the engine. His expression frozen now the horses have bolted, too leaden to fly. Thank you.
I have 2 poems for you. The Lifting of the Veil. White, sheer gauze, covers all before me. Nothing, only whiteness. Wetness, but not raining. Soft day. Peering hard towards the horizons that should be there, but aren't. Silence, all wrapped up. In this veil, far away towards the east, it's brighter, can't see. Its white brightness hurts the eyes. Gradually, it seems to move. At first, a hint of green appears. Fuzzy outlines, white houses, diamond webs left behind. Shimmer slowly. The veil is raised. The gauze dome of the crystal bowl, placed over the village, is raised. A power unseen. Vision restored. Flicks of red miss the greens. White roses move in the breeze, casting their sweet scent upon sodden airwaves. White wool, more color appears. Plaintive sounds hang on the air. The mountain emerges faintly. What power the veil to make mountain and sea disappear. Dawn chorus begins to stir. The shrouded lady lifts the edges of her veil. Mother Nature, her beauty protected. Yet another day, being lifted for us to behold. Protect her treasures. The second one is called I'm Thinking. I'm thinking as I walk the edge of the beach. Enough is enough. Why is it that what was is no longer enough? On 50 meters of sheltered shore, here lies at least 50 pounds of plastic. Bottles, wellies, marigolds, bin bags, broken buckets, cracked and broken buoys, styrofoam boat bumpers, plastic sick-pack rings, broken torn nets, blue pieces of rope. I'm thinking as I walk, why? Why did we have to give up glass, bottles, milk, minerals, and beer? Before recycling was vogue, it happened. There was incentive, reward for kids, pocket money. Find those throwaways, get money. Find those throwaways, get cents. It gave us something to do when we complained of being bored. Out the door and get rewards for what you found. I'm thinking, what was wrong with all the paper discs that were on the bottles, fitting snugly in a ridge at the top, pulled out by a little tab? Others squeezed tight with pleats. What happened to all the cardboard milk cartons I drank every day at school? They worked fine. Why did we have to throw away what was enough for new and better? I'm thinking that new is not always better. Enough is enough. I'm thinking we used to go to work. We had a job to do. We knew what to do and did it. Then comes computers, internets, and email, all to make life easier, but instead led to my information overload. Stress levels higher, higher expectations, immediate responses expected. A workday finished, but leaving never finished. I'm thinking, enough is enough. It used to be enough. No used to mean no. When parents and teachers said no, it meant just that. If you dared ask again, you were asked, what part of no didn't you understand? N or O? I'm thinking, when Granuaile and people before were finished, they left behind stone walls, houses, castles, jetties, dolmens, carrions, all recycled. Enough was enough, at least until the famine. That was due to greed and weather. I'm thinking the weather's still here, so is greed. Make plastic, throw away, use more, get more, work more, never enough. When we're gone, will we leave castles? Houses and walls that last? Recycled from fields? I'm thinking we better find a way to say enough is enough.
Okay, this is a piece I wrote again for Achill Writers for our homework. I'm no stranger to the rain. Sean Kane has a song, I'm no stranger to the rain, and recently I quoted him on the morning of my first visit to Clare Island. My trip was postponed twice. First time the ferry was cancelled because of a storm. Second time there was a medical evacuation on the island. So third time lucky. I was going there as part of my new job. I was travelling out with our local doctor, and as arranged, the boat was picking me up at Anil here in Corran. My commute, 2 minutes. It was lashing rain as I waited on the pier, so much so that you could hardly see the sea sprinter as she arrived. The boat couldn't get close enough. There was about a 6-foot gap. I thought to myself, sweet Jesus, I hope I don't have to jump. I didn't think me knees could manage it. Alan, our skipper, turned the boat around and backed in. Again I called on Jesus as I looked at the steep, very narrow, steep steps I had to descend without a handrail. Luckily, there was a lovely man, James, who helped me. Finally, I was loaded. We went across to Caveog to collect Dr. Noreen. She arrived with a super value shopping bag to carry all her equipment. I smiled as I wondered if I was a bit OTT with my posh rucksack. We set off, Noreen and I chatting away, me pretending to be grand as the waves washed over the cabin. There was a bench each side of the cabin with a pole to hold on to if it got rocky. It was way too rocky for me, so although all I wanted to do was hang on to the pole for dear life, Noreen was closer to it, and I decided not to make an idiot of myself and lunge across her to steady myself. I saw nothing but seawater on the journey out, my stomach heaving as we banged up and down over each wave, with the nose of the boat pointing to the sky. As we pulled into the harbour, Noreen got a phone call. There was an emergency. We would be there in 2 minutes, I heard her say. I don't remember getting off the boat on Clare Island. I only remember Noreen taking off running, and I couldn't keep up to her. Just then, a red van arrived to collect us. Noreen opened the door and told me to get in, as she went to the back of the van. It was an emergency after all, so I did what I was told. The woman driving it said, "I'm Mary," as she took off flying. I noticed a stethoscope and a box of masks on the dashboard. I thought she was a driver, but realised she was in fact the nurse. When we got to the health centre, I opened the back of the van to find the doctor sitting on boxes with bags and oxygen tanks and God knows what else in there. I felt awful. That didn't matter. They both went straight to the patient, and I found my way to the kitchen. I could hear a woman crying and hoped she would be okay. Mary peeked in to tell me to help myself to some tea. I felt really in the way, but so delighted and relieved when Noreen came in and said she had found what was wrong. She was still concerned though and was sending the woman to hospital, and as the weather was so bad, she was requesting the helicopter. At this stage, the woman's husband had arrived. He was dispatched to get her bag, and while they were waiting for the helicopter to arrive, Mary drove me to the house of the woman I had arranged to see. I rang the doorbell, and a woman in her 60s answered it and invited me in. She made tea for us both and put my wet coat in front of the range to dry, while we chatted and I filled in the information I needed. After about an hour, she rang the nurse, and 10 minutes later, she was outside. We said our goodbyes, and I hopped into the red van. When I inquired how the other woman was, it was all over. She was already in the hospital. I never heard or saw a thing. We were on the other side of the island. Noreen told us about the telemedicine pilot program running on the island.
I would see it on the way back to the boat that was now waiting for us. This time I insisted that the doctor was not getting into the back of the van. I did instead. I couldn't see a thing. It was pitch black as we rattled our way down to the pier. My heart was full and all was well, a great day's work. I got back on the boat. We were heading for Corral. I chatted to Alan, our skipper, as he told me of the connections his family had with the O'Malley's boat builders, my neighbours. Meanwhile, Noreen was outside on the back of the boat, attending a Zoom meeting on her phone. When we got back to Ahaneil, the boat pulled up along the ladder. I again wondered would I manage it, but helped by the two men, I did, and said goodbye as they set off for Caveog with Noreen. I was filled with admiration for the people who live on the island, for the nurse who takes care of the medical needs, as well as doing taxi and ambulance in the little red van, for the woman I had just met who lost her husband and lives alone with her family living on the mainland, for the woman who had to go alone by helicopter to the hospital. I couldn't help but wonder how she was going to get home. I remembered the text Noreen sent me early that morning saying, "Sorry about the rain," and I replied, "I'm no stranger to the rain," and once again thought of how lucky the people of Clare Island are to have her as their GP.
Thank you, Sheila. And before reading the concluding piece, I would really like to thank the Heinrich Böll Association for hosting us writers every year, year after year. And it's an absolute pleasure to be reading for all of you. So thank you in the name of all the writers. Would you read that again? It was spring 2016, one of the first Achill Writers meetings I had joined. Our group had gathered in Ted Lavell's pub. We had all contributed our €2 for a cup of tea, put our cookies on the table, and now took turns reading. I had just finished reading my homework. I looked up surprised. Ann Shannon looked at me, her friendly face lit up, and repeated, "Would you read that again?" I still can bring Anne's voice back into my head. Her soft, kind voice. Feel free to close your eyes. She leaned back into her chair and smiled, and with closed eyes, I read to her. Driving through the Sound, Main Street lined with double-parked cars, up to the bridge. The funeral car in front of the church a beacon of birth, of joy, of loss, togetherness, a farewell, a life of hardship, shared moments, a life, a lifetime. Sitting by the fireplace, dark red wine balancing on a tall stem, its velvety reflections dancing against the flames, bold and perky movements. I remember you and me. Once and again I want to fill you, like the wine fills the goblet, nestle myself in every cell of your body, stretch my longing into your toes, your fingers, hide under your thumb and in the folds of your neck. Find comfort in your belly and the hollow of your back. Be you, be me, feel you through me. See through your eyes, breathe our breath, skin is us. Forget time, hardship, loss, farewells. I want again, immerse myself in the eternity of us. The funeral car, now a small spot in my rear window, a poem springs to mind. Anne's generation, the silent generation. That demographic cohort marked by determination, resilience, respect, self-sacrifice, and a great sense of fairness. Also the generation born into the middle of a raging world war. Anne was a small girl, merely 5 years of age, when the first nuclear bomb wiped out countless lives in Hiroshima. Isn't it just insane that that bomb was named Little Boy? To some scientists, Hiroshima marked the start of climate change, as the nuclear explosions later proved to have caused major disruptions to temperature patterns, sunlight, rainfall. Others then pointed to the Industrial Revolution and the way we have been firing oil, gas, coal into the atmosphere to fuel 80% of our energy needs. Climate change, toxic waste, microplastic, fossil fuels, all words that did not exist when Anne grew up. Fears which did not exist. Anne was a teenager when Achill Island got connected to the electricity grid. A young woman when Tupperware parties were still a sign of sophistication. Anne's generation grew up afraid of yet another war. The young generation now is growing up fearing pollution, emissions, and extinction. There is no strife to me between old and young when it comes to having to save our home, our planet. That conflict is a myth. We share the same threat. And we are equally guilty of inflicting harm on the planet, on our homes and that of others, close by, and even worse, far, far away. It is 2023. We are all afraid. We now need to sit back, close our eyes, and just like Anne, listen to each other. I still can bring Anne's kind voice back into my head. A smile at the end of every sentence she had. Let us be kind to each other, to ourselves, and to the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina, because you brought what we wanted in this session, in this event, to remember Anne, but also cover the elements of climate and environment and place. And that was done so beautifully. Thank you to all our readers. Thank you to the Heinrich Böll Association for having us each year. And now I would like to call on our chairperson, Kathleen, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Sheila, and thank you to the wonderful Achill Writers Group. It's been a long weekend, it's been a wonderful weekend, and I'm not going to keep you very long, but there's a few little concluding remarks that I'd like to make. And as I think and ponder upon all that has happened this weekend, and I look down at the group of people, our gathering here, I can now say we're friends of the Achill Heinrich Böll Association, and that's how we can address each other. Thank you for your wonderful support to the association this weekend. Thank you to all of our wonderful, wonderful speakers, and thanks to all of our sponsors who sponsor not only the residency but all of our activities this weekend. I want to thank the Department of Tourism and Culture, Mayo County Council, the Department of Foreign Affairs through the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany, the Goethe Institute, and Roman, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. I need more lessons, I think. Poetry Ireland, the Arts Council. I also want to thank Maureen Malloy. Maureen has helped us out so much this weekend. To Ham and Francis of Red Fox Press. And I also want to thank Maria Lynn and John McHugh, who are on sound, and to Sean Malloy, Blue Flag Media, and TJ, all of whom have done fantastic work for us this weekend. And as we part, may we leave our best wishes, and may we take only good memories. Mother Nature has been very good to us this weekend with our beautiful weather, so she must have known that we're on her side. And go merimid bjorn am shorish, that we may all be well at this time again. And I want to welcome now Diarmuid Gielty, Hans and John to conclude our weekend in music. Thank you all very much.